Jake Morrison stood at attention in the shuttle bay of the USS Liberty. His black combat boots were polished to a shine. His uniform was pressed and clean. The Marine sergeant checked his weapon one more time. Everything had to be perfect for this mission. Today was different from any other day in Jake's military career. He was not going to fight a battle. He was not going to storm an enemy base. Instead, he was going to protect diplomats at a peace meeting. The very idea seemed strange to him. The shuttle doors opened with a soft hiss. Jake stepped out onto the landing platform of the most beautiful place he had ever seen. The palace of Queen Lyrale rose before him like something from a dream. Tall crystal towers reached toward the sky. The walls seemed to glow with their own light. Everything sparkled in the alien sun. Planet Zephyria was the capital world of the Valdari Empire. The Valdari were not human. They were taller than most people Jake knew. Their skin had a pale blue color. Their eyes were large and silver. When they moved, they seemed to flow like water. They looked elegant and graceful in ways that humans never could. Jake had studied the Valdari during the long trip to their world. His training file said they were advanced in technology. They had weapons that could destroy whole planets. They had ships that could travel faster than anything humans had built. Most importantly, they had powers of the mind that humans did not understand. Ambassador Lisa Carter walked beside Jake as they entered the palace. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had spent years learning about alien cultures. This meeting was the most important work of her life. "Remember, Sergeant," she said quietly, "we are guests here. The Valdari have agreed to talk peace for the first time in 200 years. Do not give them any reason to change their minds." Jake nodded. He understood his job. He was here to watch and protect. He was not here to start trouble, but something about this place made him feel uneasy. His soldier instincts told him to stay alert. The palace halls were enormous. The ceiling was so high that Jake could barely see it. Strange music played softly in the air. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves. Valdari servants moved through the halls like ghosts. They did not look at the human visitors. Guards lined the walls every few steps. These were the famous Praetorian Guard of Queen Lyrale. They wore armor that looked like it was made from metal and light mixed together. Their faces were hidden behind smooth helmets. Each guard carried a weapon that hummed with energy. Jake studied the guards as he walked. Something about them bothered him. They stood perfectly still, but he could sense tension in their bodies. Their weapons were ready. Their stance was alert. These were not guards at a peaceful meeting. These were soldiers expecting a fight. The throne room was the largest space Jake had ever been inside. The floor was made of some kind of crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns. Columns held up a ceiling that seemed to go on forever. At the far end of the room sat a throne that looked like it was carved from a single giant diamond. Queen Lyrale sat on that throne with perfect posture. She was beautiful in the way that Valdari were beautiful. Her skin seemed to glow with soft light. Her long hair moved as if it was floating in water. Her silver eyes looked at everything and everyone with intelligence that was both ancient and young. She wore robes that changed color as Jake watched. First they were blue like the ocean, then they became purple like the evening sky, then they shifted to gold like the sun. The fabric seemed to be made of light itself, but Jake was trained to look beyond the obvious. He watched the queen's face while the diplomats talked. He saw small signs that most people would miss. Her hands gripped the arms of her throne too tightly. Her eyes moved to the guards more often than they should. When she thought no one was looking, her expression showed worry. The peace talks began with formal words. Ambassador Carter spoke about trade between their peoples. She talked about sharing technology and knowledge. She offered friendship between humans and Valdari. A Valdari minister answered for the queen. His voice was musical like all Valdari voices. He spoke of old conflicts and deep mistrust. He asked why humans could be trusted now when they had been enemies for so long. Jake listened to the words, but he watched the people. The human team sat together, united in their purpose. The Valdari delegates sat apart from each other. Some looked angry. Others looked afraid. A few kept glancing at the guards as if they were waiting for something. The queen herself said very little. When she did speak, her voice was calm and controlled. But Jake noticed that she never looked directly at her own guards. She never smiled at her own people. She sat alone on her throne even though the room was full of her subjects. Hours passed as the two sides talked. Jake's feet began to hurt from standing so long. His back was sore from staying alert. But he did not move from his position. A good soldier did not complain about discomfort. During a break in the talks, Jake stepped outside onto a balcony. The view of the Valdari capital city was amazing. Tall buildings rose like crystal trees. Flying vehicles moved between them like schools of fish. In the distance, 3 moons hung in the purple sky. Another Marine joined him on the balcony. Corporal Danny White was younger than Jake and new to diplomatic missions. "This place is incredible," Danny said. "I never imagined anything could be so beautiful." Jake nodded, but he was still thinking about what he had seen inside. "Something is wrong here," he said. "What do you mean?" Danny asked. "The guards," Jake said. "They are not protecting the queen. They are watching her. And the way the Valdari nobles act around her, they are afraid, but not of us. They are afraid of something else." Danny looked confused. "Maybe that is just how their culture works." Jake shook his head. He had been in enough dangerous situations to trust his instincts. "No, something bad is going to happen here. I can feel it." As the sun set over the Crystal City, Jake made a decision. He would stay close to Ambassador Carter as ordered. But he would also keep watching Queen Lyrelei. If trouble came, she would be the first target. And despite everything that made them enemies, Jake could not let an innocent person die on his watch. The formal dinner that evening was held in another enormous hall. The food was strange but delicious. The Valdari ate very little and spoke in quiet voices. The queen sat at the head of the long table, but she seemed more alone than ever. Jake stood against the wall with the other guards, both human and Valdari. He watched everything and everyone, and deep in his soldier's heart he knew that tomorrow would bring violence to this beautiful place. The question was not if something would happen. The question was whether he would be ready when it did. The second day of peace talks began like the first. Jake stood in his position near Ambassador Carter. The morning light came through the crystal windows and painted rainbow patterns on the floor. Everything looked peaceful and beautiful. Queen Lyrelei entered the throne room wearing robes of deep green. She moved with the same grace as before, but Jake could see she was tired. Her silver eyes had dark circles under them. She had not slept well. The queen took her place on the diamond throne. Her Praetorian guards moved into their positions around the room. But today, Jake noticed something different about them. They stood closer to the exits than before. Their weapons were not just ready, they were activated. The soft hum of energy filled the air. Ambassador Carter was presenting a trade agreement when it happened. A loud alarm began to sound throughout the palace. The noise was sharp and urgent. It made Jake's ears hurt. Red lights began flashing on the walls. The beautiful music that always played in the palace stopped. In its place came a voice speaking in the Valdari language. The words were fast and angry. Jake did not understand the language, but he understood fear. Every Valdari in the room looked terrified. Some of the nobles jumped to their feet. Others fell to their knees. All of them stared at Queen Lyrelei with panic in their silver eyes. The queen stood up from her throne. Her face had gone pale. She spoke quickly to one of her ministers in their musical language. The minister shook his head and backed away from her. Ambassador Carter moved toward Jake. "What is happening?" she asked. Before Jake could answer, the voice on the palace speakers switched to English. The accent was heavy, but the words were clear. "People of Zephyria," the voice said. "I am General Korath of the 3rd Valdari Fleet. Queen Lyrelei has betrayed our people. She has chosen to bow before the weak humans instead of maintaining our strength. I have taken control of the planet's defenses. The Queen's rule is over." Jake felt his blood turn cold. This was a military coup. Someone was trying to take over the government by force, and they were trapped in the middle of it. The Queen spoke to her guards in their language. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the authority in it. She was giving them orders. What happened next shocked Jake more than the coup announcement. The Praetorian guards looked at each other. Then one by one they began to remove their helmets. Underneath the beautiful armor were faces Jake had never seen before. These were not the guards who had been protecting the Queen yesterday. These were different Valdari with hard expressions and cruel eyes. The lead guard stepped forward. He spoke to the Queen in English so everyone could understand. "Your Majesty," he said, but his voice was full of mockery. "General Korath sends his greetings. He thanks you for making this so easy." Queen Lyrelei stood perfectly still. Jake had seen that look on faces before. It was the expression of someone who had just realized they had been betrayed by people they trusted. "Where are my real guards?" the Queen asked. The fake guard smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Dead or imprisoned. We have been planning this for months. Every move you made, every decision you considered, we reported to the General. Even your desire for peace with these humans." The Queen's silver eyes found Jake across the room. For just a moment, their eyes met. He saw something in her face that he had never expected to see. She was not asking for help. She was apologizing. She was sorry that her people's betrayal would hurt the humans, too. Ambassador Carter grabbed Jake's arm. "We need to leave, now." The human security team was already moving. They had their weapons out and were heading for the exit. Jake could hear explosions in the distance. The coup was not just happening in the palace. It was happening all over the city. "Move! Move! Move!" shouted Captain Steve Rogers, the head of human security. "Everyone to the shuttle. We are leaving this planet." Jake started to follow his team. His training told him to protect the ambassador and get her to safety. That was his job. That was his duty. But as he reached the door, he looked back at the throne room. Queen Lyrelei stood alone in the center of the vast space. Her fake guards were walking away, leaving her defenseless. The Valdari nobles had already fled through side doors. In seconds, she would be completely alone. Jake stopped walking. His team kept moving toward the exit, but he stayed where he was. "Sergeant Morrison," Captain Rogers shouted. "What are you doing?" Jake looked at his captain. He looked at Ambassador Carter. Then he looked back at the Queen. She was trying to access a control panel near her throne. Her fingers moved quickly over the crystal surface, but nothing was happening. The treacherous guards had locked her out of her own palace systems. "She does not deserve this," Jake said. "She is not our problem," the captain replied. "Our job is to get our people to safety." Jake knew the captain was right. Queen Lyrelei was not human. She was not even an ally. Until yesterday, the Valdari had been enemies of humanity. Jake had no duty to protect her, but he also knew something else. He had spent 2 days watching this woman. He had seen her try to make peace when her own people wanted war. He had seen her stand alone against the hate and fear of her subjects. She was trying to do the right thing, and her reward was betrayal. More explosions shook the palace. Dust fell from the high ceiling. Through the crystal windows, Jake could see ships landing in the city. General Korath's forces were taking control of everything. "Go," Jake told his captain. "Get the ambassador to safety. I will catch up." "Sergeant, that is an order," Captain Rogers said. Jake had been a soldier for 10 years. He had always followed orders. He had never disobeyed a direct command from a superior officer. But as he watched Queen Lyrelei standing alone and helpless, he made a choice that surprised even himself. "I am sorry, sir," he said, "but I cannot leave her like this." Before anyone could stop him, Jake ran back into the throne room. Behind him, he heard Captain Rogers cursing and Ambassador Carter calling his name. But he did not stop. Queen Lyrelei looked up in surprise as Jake approached her. "Human soldier," she said. "Why are you not fleeing with your people?" "Because it is not right," Jake said simply. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Around them, the palace shook with more explosions. In the distance, they could hear the sound of marching feet. General Korath's soldiers were coming. "You do not understand," the Queen said. "If you stay here, you will die. Korath will show no mercy to humans who side with me." Jake checked his weapon and looked around the throne room. There were several exits, but he could already hear soldiers in the hallways beyond them. They were trapped. "Then we better find a way to stay alive," he said. For the first time since he had met her, Queen Lyrelei smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her silver eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably both," Jake admitted. "Now, is there anywhere in this palace we can defend?" The Queen nodded toward a door behind her throne. "The central spire has its own power source and communication array. If we can reach it, we might be able to call for help." "Then that is where we go," Jake said. As they moved toward the door, Jake heard the main entrance to the throne room explode inward. Heavy boots echoed in the vast space. Harsh voices shouted orders in the Valdari language. Jake and Queen Lyrelei ran through the door just as the first enemy soldiers entered the throne room. Laser blasts followed them, burning holes in the crystal walls. They were now alone in a hostile palace surrounded by enemies. Jake was a single human soldier with limited ammunition. The Queen was a ruler without an army. According to every military manual Jake had ever read, their situation was hopeless. But as they climbed the stairs toward the central spire, Jake felt something he had not expected. He felt determined. For the first time in his military career, he was fighting for something he truly believed in. He was fighting for honor. He was fighting for justice. He was fighting to prove that humans never abandoned those who deserved protection, no matter who they were or where they came from. Jake and Queen Lyrelei reached the central spire after climbing what felt like 1,000 steps. The spire was a round room with windows that looked out over the entire city. Banks of crystal computers lined the walls. In the center stood a raised platform with control panels that glowed with soft blue light. Jake was breathing hard from the climb. His human lungs were not made for running up so many stairs. But Queen Lyrelei moved as if she had barely been walking. Her alien body was stronger than it looked. "This is the command center for the entire palace," the Queen explained. She moved to the main control panel and placed her hands on the crystal surface. "From here, I should be able to activate the defense systems and call for help." Jake watched as she touched different parts of the panel. Colors swirled under her fingers, but nothing happened. No lights came on. No sounds indicated that the systems were working. "What is wrong?" Jake asked. The Queen's face showed frustration and anger. "They have locked me out. The traitors changed all the access codes. I cannot control my own palace." Jake looked around the room. He had been trained in military engineering. All computer systems worked on the same basic principles, even alien ones. There had to be a way to bypass the security locks. "Show me the main power coupling," he said. The Queen looked at him with surprise. "You think you can understand Valdari technology?" "Maybe not understand it," Jake said. "But I might be able to make it work anyway." The Queen pointed to a panel near the floor. Jake knelt down and opened it. Inside were conduits that carried energy to the computers. The patterns were different from human technology, but the purpose was the same. Jake pulled tools from his military kit. He had wire cutters, a small welding torch, and bypass circuits that could connect different systems. His training had taught him to improvise when proper equipment was not available. "What are you doing?" the Queen asked. "I am going to trick your computers," Jake said as he worked. "Instead of using the main access codes, I am going to connect my portable equipment directly to your power systems. It will not give us full control, but it might give us something." The Queen watched him work with growing amazement. "Your tools are so primitive compared to ours. How can they possibly interface with advanced Valdari systems?" Jake smiled as he connected a human battery pack to an alien power conduit. "Sometimes simple tools work better than complex ones. They are harder to break and easier to fix." Sparks flew as Jake completed the connection. Suddenly, some of the lights in the room came on. A few of the computer panels began to glow. It was not much, but it was a start. "Incredible," the Queen whispered. "You made it work." Jake stood up and wiped his hands on his uniform. "It is not perfect, but we should have basic communications and maybe some defensive systems." As if to test his words, alarms began sounding in the distance. Jake had managed to reactivate some of the palace's warning systems. Through the windows, they could see General Korath's forces surrounding the central spire. Queen Lyrelei moved to a communication panel that was now working. She spoke rapidly in her own language, sending out calls for help. But the responses she received made her face fall. "What is it?" Jake asked. "General Korath controls most of the military," she said. "The few units that remain loyal to me are scattered across the planet. They cannot reach us in time." Jake looked out the windows at the enemy forces below. There were hundreds of soldiers down there. They had heavy weapons and flying vehicles. Even if help was coming, he and the Queen would have to survive until it arrived. "Then we make our stand here," Jake said. He began checking his equipment. He had his rifle, 4 extra magazines of ammunition, 2 grenades, and his military knife. It was not much against an army. The Queen watched him prepare for battle. "You could still escape," she said. "There are maintenance tunnels that lead outside the palace. You could reach your people." Jake looked at her seriously. "Why do you want peace with humanity?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Because war brings only death and suffering. I have seen too many of my people die fighting yours. I want to build something better." "That is why I am staying," Jake said. "Someone who wants to build instead of destroy deserves protection." For the first time, Jake saw emotion in the Queen's silver eyes. It was not the cold control she had shown during the peace talks. It was genuine feeling, gratitude, respect, and something else he could not identify. I have misjudged your species, she said quietly. I thought humans were driven only by aggression and self-interest. Some of us are, Jake admitted. But some of us believe in doing what is right, even when it is difficult. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed up the stairwell. General Korath's soldiers were climbing toward them. Jake estimated they had maybe 5 minutes before the attack began. He looked around the room again, this time with a soldier's eye for defense. The spire had good sight lines and only one entrance. The crystal walls were strong enough to stop small weapons fire. If he was smart about it, he could hold this position for a while. Can you use a weapon? Jake asked the Queen. She nodded and moved to a wall panel. When she opened it, Jake saw energy rifles that looked more advanced than anything humans had built. The Queen took one and checked its charge. I am not helpless, she said. I have trained in combat since I was young. A ruler who cannot fight cannot protect her people. Jake positioned himself near the doorway while the Queen took cover behind the central computer platform. They did not have to wait long. The first enemy soldiers appeared in the doorway cautiously. They knew Jake was armed and dangerous, but they probably thought one human would be easy to defeat. Jake proved them wrong. His first shot took down the lead soldier before the enemy could even aim. His second shot forced the others back into the stairwell. The sound of energy weapons echoed through the spire. They will try to rush us, Jake called to the Queen. When I say now, use your weapon to cover the doorway. More soldiers appeared, this time in greater numbers. Jake's rifle barked repeatedly as he fired into the crowd, but there were too many of them. Some got through and entered the room. Now, Jake shouted. Queen Lyrelay rose from behind her cover and fired her energy weapon. The beam of blue light swept across the room, forcing the enemies to dive for protection. Jake used the distraction to reload his rifle. For several minutes, they held off the attack. Jake's human training and the Queen's alien technology worked together to keep the enemies at bay. But both of them knew this was only the beginning. They are testing our defenses, Jake explained during a brief pause. The real attack will come soon and it will be much worse. The Queen activated one of the computer panels Jake had repaired. Images appeared showing other parts of the palace. General Korath's forces were setting up heavy weapons aimed at the spire. They are bringing siege equipment, she said. Those walls will not protect us much longer. Jake studied the images on the screen. The enemies had rocket launchers, energy cannons, and something that looked like a plasma drill designed to cut through the strongest materials. How long until your loyal forces can reach us? He asked. The Queen checked her communications. Several hours at the minimum. Korath has blocked all the main routes to the palace. Jake did some quick calculations in his head. With the weapons the enemies were bringing, the spire would not last more than 30 minutes once the main attack started. They needed a new plan. Is there anything else in this palace that could help us? He asked. Secret weapons? Hidden defenses? Anything? The Queen thought for a moment. There are the ancient vaults beneath the palace. They contain artifacts from the early days of our civilization. Some of them are weapons too dangerous to use. Right now, dangerous sounds good, Jake said. The Queen looked uncertain. You do not understand. These weapons were sealed away because they could destroy not just our enemies but ourselves as well. Jake heard the sound of heavy machinery being moved into position outside. Whatever the enemies were planning, it would begin soon. Sometimes, he said, the only way to win is to take risks that seem impossible. The Queen stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. There is a passage behind that wall panel. It leads down to the vaults. But once we leave this room, we cannot return. The enemies will destroy everything up here. Jake looked around the spire one last time. It had been a good defensive position, but it was about to become a trap. Sometimes a soldier had to know when to retreat to fight another day. Then we go down, he said, and we find something that will even the odds. As they prepared to leave their defensive position, Jake realized something had changed between him and Queen Lyrelay. They were no longer a human soldier and an alien ruler. They were partners, fighting together against impossible odds. And somehow that partnership felt like the most important thing in the galaxy. The hidden passage led down into the dark heart of the palace. Jake followed Queen Lyrelay through tunnels that had been carved from solid rock thousands of years ago. The walls were covered with strange symbols that glowed with pale light. These passages are older than the palace above, the Queen explained as they walked. They were built by my ancestors when the Valdari first came to this world. Jake kept his rifle ready as they descended deeper underground. The air grew cooler and filled with a strange humming sound. It reminded him of the energy weapons the Valdari used, but much more powerful. After what felt like an hour of walking, they reached a massive door made of black metal. Ancient symbols covered its surface. In the center was a handprint scanner that still glowed with blue light after all these centuries. Queen Lirali placed her hand on the scanner. The door recognized her genetic pattern and began to open with a deep rumbling sound. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of old metal and forgotten power. "Welcome to the Vault of Forbidden Things," the Queen said. Jake stepped inside and felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber was enormous, larger even than the throne room above. Along the walls stood weapons that looked like they had been designed by gods rather than mortals. Some were clearly guns, but they were the size of small buildings. Others looked like armor that could protect entire armies. In the center of the room stood something that Jake could not even identify, a sphere of dark metal that seemed to absorb light itself. "Your people built all this?" Jake asked in amazement. "My ancestors were not always peaceful," the Queen replied. "In the early days, we fought terrible wars against other races. These weapons were created for those conflicts. When the wars ended, we sealed them away, hoping never to use them again." Jake walked among the ancient weapons, looking for something he could actually use. Most were too large or too complex for one person to operate. But in a corner of the vault, he found something more promising. It was a suit of armor that looked like it was made for someone human-sized. The metal was silver and seemed to flow like liquid. Next to it hung a weapon that was clearly a rifle, but more advanced than anything Jake had ever seen. "What is this?" he asked. The Queen looked at the armor with recognition and fear. "That is the armor of the last warrior. It was made for single combat against impossible odds. The wearer becomes faster, stronger, and nearly impossible to kill. But the power comes with a cost." "What kind of cost?" "The armor bonds with its wearer permanently. Once you put it on, you can never take it off. It will keep you alive, but you will no longer be entirely human." Jake stared at the armor. Above them, he could hear the sound of explosions as General Korath's forces attacked the spire. Soon they would discover the passage and come looking for them. He needed every advantage he could get. "Will it help me protect you?" he asked. The Queen nodded slowly. "You would become nearly unstoppable in battle. But Jake, you must understand, this choice cannot be undone." Jake thought about his life as a human soldier. He thought about his home on Earth, his family, his friends. If he put on this armor, he would never see any of them again. He would become something else, something between human and alien. But then he thought about Queen Lirali standing alone in her throne room, abandoned by everyone she trusted. He thought about the peace she was trying to build, and the war that would come if she died. "Some things were worth any sacrifice. Help me put it on," he said. The Queen's silver eyes showed sadness and respect. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, human or Valdari." The armor was surprisingly light as Jake put it on piece by piece. The moment the final piece clicked into place, he felt power surge through his body. His vision became sharper. His hearing became more sensitive. He could feel his muscles growing stronger. But there was something else. The armor was not just equipment, it was alive. He could feel it connecting with his mind, learning how he thought and fought. It was becoming part of him, just as he was becoming part of it. Jake picked up the weapon that went with the armor. It felt perfect in his hands, as if it had been made specifically for him. When he thought about firing it, targeting information appeared in his vision. The armor and weapon were designed to work together as one system. "How do you feel?" the Queen asked. Jake tested his new abilities. He could move faster than any human had ever moved. He could lift weights that would have been impossible before. Most importantly, he could sense the enemy soldiers approaching through the tunnels above them. "Different," he said, "but still me." The sound of marching feet echoed down the passage. General Korath's forces had found the hidden door. They would be in the vault within minutes. Jake and Queen Lirali took positions near the entrance. But Jake was no longer thinking defensively. The armor filled him with confidence and aggression. He wanted to take the fight to his enemies. "Stay behind me," he told the Queen. "This time we do not just defend. We attack." The first enemy soldiers appeared in the doorway cautiously. They had heard stories about the ancient weapons in the vault and were afraid of what they might find. They were right to be afraid. Jake moved faster than the human eye could follow. His alien weapon fired beams of energy that cut through enemy armor like paper. In seconds, the entire squad was down, and Jake was already moving toward the passage to engage the next group. The Queen followed behind him, amazed by what she was seeing. Jake fought like no warrior she had ever witnessed. He combined human tactics with alien technology to create something entirely new, but the enemies kept coming. General Korath had brought hundreds of soldiers to the palace. Even with his new abilities, Jake could not fight them all at once. "We need to reach the surface," Jake said during a brief pause in the fighting. "If we stay down here, they will eventually overwhelm us with numbers." "The main stairway is blocked," the Queen replied. "They have sealed all the exits." Jake smiled grimly. The armor was showing him possibilities he had never considered before. "Then we make our own exit." He aimed his weapon at the ceiling of the tunnel. The energy beam cut through solid rock as if it were soft clay. Debris fell around them as Jake carved an opening that led straight up toward the palace above. "Can you climb?" he asked the Queen. She nodded, though she looked uncertain about his plan. Jake went first, using his enhanced strength to pull himself up through the hole he had made. The Queen followed, moving with the natural grace of her people. Behind them, they could hear angry voices as the enemy soldiers discovered their escape route. They emerged in the palace's main courtyard, right in the middle of General Korath's army. Hundreds of soldiers surrounded them immediately. Flying vehicles circled overhead. Heavy weapons were aimed at them from every direction. Standing in the center of the courtyard was General Korath himself. He was the largest Valdari Jake had ever seen, nearly 8 feet tall and covered in cybernetic implants that enhanced his natural abilities. His face was scarred from old battles and his eyes burned with hatred. "So," the general said in a voice like grinding metal, "the weak queen has found herself a pet human. How touching." Jake stepped forward, placing himself between the general and Queen Lyreley. The armor made him feel confident, but he was still vastly outnumbered. "General Korath," the Queen said formally, "you have committed treason against the crown and the people of Zephyria. Surrender now and you will be given a fair trial." The general laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "I will surrender to no one, especially not to a ruler who has forgotten the pride of our people." He turned his attention to Jake. "Human soldier, you have fought well. I offer you safe passage off this world. Leave now and you will live to see another day." Jake checked his weapon and adjusted his stance. Around them, hundreds of enemy soldiers waited for the order to attack. This was the moment of truth. "I am not going anywhere," Jake said clearly. General Korath's expression hardened. "Then you will die for nothing. You are not Valdari. This is not your fight." Jake thought about all the reasons he could give. He could talk about duty or honor or justice. He could explain his military oath or his personal beliefs. Instead, he said something simple and true. "She tried to make peace. That makes it my fight." The general raised his hand to signal the attack. Jake prepared to sell his life as dearly as possible. Queen Lyreley stood beside him, ready to face whatever came next. In that moment, surrounded by enemies and facing certain death, Jake felt something he had never experienced before. He felt complete. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The attack began with a sound like thunder. Energy weapons fired from every direction. The final battle had started, and Jake Morrison was ready to show an alien galaxy what human courage really meant. The battle that followed was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. The ancient armor moved his body faster than thought. His weapon fired beams of energy that could cut through any material. But even with these advantages, he was still one warrior against an army. Jake rolled behind a crystal fountain as enemy fire rained down around him. The armor protected him from most of the damage, but he could feel its power slowly draining with each hit. The weapon was incredibly powerful, but it was not unlimited. Queen Lyreley crouched beside him, firing her own weapon at the circling aircraft. "There are too many of them," she said. "Even with the ancient armor, you cannot fight them all." Jake looked around the courtyard. General Korath's soldiers were advancing from every direction. Flying vehicles swooped down to attack them from above. Heavy weapons were being moved into position to finish them off. "Maybe I cannot win," Jake said, "but I can make sure they remember this fight." He stood up and charged directly at the largest group of enemy soldiers. The armor made him nearly invisible as he moved. His weapon cut through their ranks like a blade through paper. For a few moments it looked like he might actually succeed, but then the heavy weapons opened fire. Energy blasts the size of cars slammed into Jake and sent him flying across the courtyard. The armor protected him from death, but he could feel it weakening. Cracks appeared in the metal. Warning lights flashed in his vision. General Korath walked toward him slowly, enjoying his victory. You fought well, human, but courage without wisdom is just another form of foolishness. Jake tried to stand, but his legs would not support him. The armor was failing. His weapon was cracked and useless. Around him, hundreds of enemy soldiers waited for the order to finish him off. Queen Lirelei ran to his side, ignoring the weapons pointed at her. She knelt beside Jake and placed her hand on his armored chest. You have done enough, she said softly. No one could have done more. General Korath raised his weapon to execute them both. Any last words before you die for your pointless ideals? Jake looked up at the general through his cracked helmet. Blood ran down his face, but his eyes were still clear and determined. Yeah, he said. I have something to say. He activated the emergency beacon in his armor. The signal went out on all frequencies, both human and Valdari. His voice was broadcast across the planet and beyond. My name is Sergeant Jake Morrison of the Terran Federation Marines, he said clearly. I came to this world as part of a peace mission. When General Korath tried to murder Queen Lirelei for wanting peace, I chose to protect her. I am about to die for that choice, and I am proud of it. The general tried to cut off the transmission, but the ancient armor was too advanced for him to understand. Jake's words continued to go out across space. To anyone listening, Jake said, remember this day. Remember that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Peace is worth fighting for. Justice is worth fighting for. And sometimes doing the right thing means standing with your former enemies against those who choose violence over hope. General Korath snarled and aimed his weapon at Jake's head, but before he could fire, new sounds filled the air. Ships were approaching the palace. Many ships. The first to arrive were human vessels. Jake recognized the markings of the USS Liberty and several other Federation ships. Ambassador Carter had not abandoned him after all. She had gone for help. But to Jake's surprise, the human ships were not alone. Valdari vessels flew alongside them. These were not General Korath's ships. These were vessels loyal to Queen Lirelei, and they had joined forces with the humans. Captain Steve Rogers' voice came over the radio. Sergeant Morrison, this is Liberty Actual. Sorry we are late to the party. The Allied fleet opened fire on General Korath's forces. The traitor soldiers found themselves caught between Jake's broadcast that had reached across the galaxy and military forces that had come to answer his call for justice, but the most important part was not the ships or the weapons. It was what Jake's broadcast had accomplished. Across the planet, Valdari citizens had heard his words. They had seen a human soldier willing to die to protect their queen while her own guards betrayed her. Riots broke out in cities across Zephyria. Valdari civilians turned against General Korath's supporters. Military units that had been neutral declared for the queen. The coup was collapsing not because of superior firepower, but because Jake had shown them what true loyalty looked like. General Korath realized his situation was hopeless. His own soldiers were surrendering or switching sides. His political support was crumbling, but he was too proud to admit defeat. If I cannot rule, he said, raising his weapon toward Queen Lirelei, then no one will. Jake tried to move, but the damaged armor would not respond. He could only watch as the general prepared to kill the queen. But Queen Lirelei was no longer the helpless ruler she had appeared to be. She had learned from watching Jake fight. She had seen what courage looked like when it was not limited by politics or tradition. She moved faster than the general expected, using techniques Jake had shown her during their battle in the spire. Her weapon fired before his did. General Korath fell to the crystal ground, defeated by the queen he had tried to destroy. The battle was over. General Korath's remaining forces surrendered. The palace was secure. Queen Lirelei was safe. But Jake's condition was growing worse. The ancient armor had saved his life, but at a terrible cost. The bonding process was failing. He was dying. Queen Lirelei knelt beside him as human and Valdari medics worked frantically to save him. Do not leave us now, she said. You have shown us something important. You have shown us what we could become. Jake smiled weakly. The armor, he whispered. It is not just keeping me alive. It is teaching me. Your ancestors, they built it to preserve knowledge, not just to make warriors. He was right. As the armor failed, it was downloading thousands of years of Valdari history and technology directly into Jake's mind. He was becoming a bridge between the two species, carrying the knowledge of both. The human medical team worked with Valdari healers to stabilize Jake's condition. It took hours, but finally they succeeded. The armor could not be removed, but they found a way to repair it and restore its power. Jake would live, though he would never again be fully human. In the days that followed, Jake became a symbol of what cooperation between humans and Valdari could accomplish. Queen Lyralee made him her special advisor on human affairs. Ambassador Carter appointed him as a permanent liaison between the two governments. The peace treaty was not just signed, it became the foundation for a true alliance. Valdari technology combined with human innovation to create wonders neither species could have imagined alone. Trade flourished. Scientific discoveries advanced by centuries. Most importantly, the two peoples began to understand each other. Jake split his time between both worlds. On Earth, he helped train human diplomats and soldiers in Valdari culture. On Zephyria, he worked with Queen Lyralee to reform Valdari society, introducing concepts of individual courage and loyalty that had been lost in their rigid traditions. The armor had changed him physically, but Jake remained the same person inside. He still believed in doing what was right no matter the cost. He still stood up for those who could not protect themselves, and he still remembered the moment when he chose to stay behind in an alien throne room because abandoning someone to die was not acceptable. Years later, when historians wrote about the turning point in human-Valdari relations, they always came back to that same moment. It was not grand strategy or superior technology that brought peace between the species. It was one human soldier who chose to protect an alien queen when everyone else had abandoned her. Jake often thought about that choice as he walked through the crystal gardens of the palace, now rebuilt and more beautiful than ever. Children of both species played together in the courtyards. Scientists from Earth and Zephyria worked side by side in the laboratories. Former enemies had become friends. Queen Lyralee found him there one evening, watching the sunset paint the crystal spires in colors of gold and crimson. She had changed too over the years. The lonely, isolated ruler had become a leader who inspired genuine loyalty and love. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The choice you made that day?" Jake looked at his armored hands, forever changed by alien technology. He thought about the life he had given up and the new life he had gained. He thought about the peace that now existed where there had once been only suspicion and fear. "No," he said simply. "Some things are worth any sacrifice." Queen Lyralee smiled and placed her hand on his armored shoulder. "My people have a saying," she said. "The greatest warriors are not those who conquer their enemies, but those who turn their enemies into friends." Jake nodded. "Humans have a saying too. A good soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. Together, they watched the stars come out over a world where two species had learned to live in harmony. It had cost Jake his humanity, but it had given him something even more valuable. The knowledge that sometimes, one person choosing to do the right thing could change the entire galaxy in the distance. Ships from both worlds moved peacefully through the sky, carrying trade goods and passengers and messages of friendship. Children who had been born after the peace could not imagine a